In a seemingly perfect marriage of 15 years, Daniel's world begins to unravel when small, unsettling changes in his wife Emma's behavior spark doubt and suspicion. What starts as subtle shifts, missed connections, guarded conversations, quickly spirals into a web of secrets and betrayal. As Daniel uncovers the truth about Emma's relationship with another man, he is forced to confront the cracks in their marriage and the choices that brought them to this breaking point. But as emotions reach a boiling point, the stakes rise, leaving their future. And my day started just like any other Saturday in late October. Cool, crisp air outside, the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, and the faint sound of birds chirping through the slightly cracked window. It was 2021, a year when the world was just beginning to catch its breath after a long stretch of uncertainty. My wife, Emma, and I had just celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary 2 weeks ago with a quiet dinner at the Italian place she loves downtown. Our life in Maplewood, a small picturesque suburb about an hour from Chicago, was, for lack of a better word, steady predictable on paper. It was everything I'd dreamed of. Emma worked as a school counselor, always with that calm, reassuring presence everyone admired. I ran a modest yet successful graphic design business from home, which gave me the flexibility to spend time with our 2 kids, Max and Lily, ages 12 and 9. If you'd asked me then, I would have told you we had the perfect life. But looking back, I should have noticed the cracks, small at first, barely visible, but growing wider with every passing day. The first sign of trouble came that morning. Though I didn't realize it at the time, Emma was unusually quiet at breakfast. Normally, she'd be buzzing with stories about her students or weekend plans for the family. Instead, she sat there, scrolling through her phone with an almost mechanical focus, occasionally nodding at my attempts to start a conversation. "Everything okay?" I finally asked, setting my coffee mug down. She looked up, startled, as if I'd pulled her out of a daydream. "Yeah," she said quickly, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired long week." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Emma had always been the type to internalize stress, and I figured it was just work. But now, when I replay that moment in my head, I see the truth. The nervous energy, the way she avoided eye contact, and the quick swipe to close whatever app she was using when I leaned in too close. By noon, Emma was out the door, heading to her yoga class at the community center. "Don't forget, I'll be home a little late," she said, grabbing her water bottle. "I told Sophie I'd help her set up for her book club after class." Sophie was her best friend, a bubbly, extroverted kindergarten teacher who lived a few blocks away. The two of them were practically inseparable, and Sophie's home had become a second haven for Emma over the years. It wasn't unusual for her to spend time there, so I didn't think twice about it. The rest of the day was uneventful. Max and Lily had soccer practice in the afternoon, and we spent most of the evening binge-watching their favorite nature documentaries while eating pizza. When Emma finally came home around 9:30, she seemed more relaxed, almost cheerful. I asked her how Sophie's book club went, and she launched into a detailed account of their discussion about some mystery novel I'd never heard of. It sounded convincing enough. But later that night, as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something odd. Emma's phone, which she normally left on the nightstand, was tucked into her purse. It wasn't a big deal, really, just a small deviation from her usual routine. Still, it stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more of these small inconsistencies. Emma's phone was suddenly glued to her hand, and she seemed to be texting more than usual. She started wearing perfume again, a floral scent I didn't recognize, and bought a couple of new outfits she claimed were just for work. Her Saturday yoga sessions stretched longer, often merging into spontaneous coffee dates with Sophie. At first, I chalked it up to Emma trying to reclaim some independence. After all, the pandemic had been hard on everyone, and I figured she was just finding ways to shake off the monotony of our predictable routines. But then, there was the incident with her laptop. One evening, as Emma was in the shower, I needed to print some forms for Max's school project. My computer was acting up, so I grabbed hers instead. As soon as I opened the browser, an unfamiliar name caught my eye in her email inbox. Alex Harper. The subject line read, "Thursday night plans." I froze. Emma had never mentioned anyone named Alex before, and the context was vague enough to set my imagination racing. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The email was brief, just a few lines about dinner reservations at a trendy new restaurant downtown, and a confirmation of the time, 7:30 p.m. No mention of who Alex was, or why Emma would be having dinner with them. When she came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her head, I casually asked, "Hey, who's Alex Harper?" The reaction was immediate. Her face went pale, and she stammered, "Oh, he's a new teacher at the school. Sophie and I were thinking about inviting him to book club." It sounded plausible, but the way she said it, too quick, too rehearsed, made my stomach twist. Still, I nodded and let it go, not wanting to start an argument over what might be nothing. The tipping point came 2 weeks later, on a rainy Thursday evening. Emma had left for another yoga class, and the kids were upstairs finishing their homework. I was working on a project in the living room when my phone buzzed. It was Sophie. "Hey, just wanted to double-check. Did Emma get Max's soccer schedule from you?" she asked. "What do you mean?" I replied, confused. "She's not here. Isn't she at your place?" There was a pause, long enough to make my heart race. "No," Sophie said slowly. "I haven't seen her all week." For a moment, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. "Maybe she's still at yoga," I muttered, more to myself than to Sophie. "I'm sure that's it," Sophie said, her voice light, but I could hear the hesitation. We said our goodbyes, but as I hung up, a gnawing suspicion began to take root. By the time Emma came home that night, I'd convinced myself to stay calm and play it cool. She walked in, her hair damp from the rain and her cheeks flushed. "How was yoga?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Good," she said, kicking off her shoes. "Tiring. And Sophie's place?" Her head snapped up, and for a split second, I saw panic flash across her face. "Oh, right," she said quickly. "She wasn't feeling well, so I just came straight home." I nodded, pretending to buy it, but as I watched her head upstairs, I knew something wasn't right. My Emma, the woman who had once been my best friend and confidant, was keeping secrets, and I was about to find out why. The fate of their family, hanging by a thread. How will it all end? Emma's behavior didn't just gnaw at the edges of my mind. It consumed my thoughts entirely. I'd catch myself zoning out during meetings or struggling to concentrate while helping Max and Lily with their homework. Every little detail started to feel suspicious. Her phone calls behind closed doors, the new outfits, and even the way she smiled. Not at me, but at her screen. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring it, but I also couldn't confront her without proof. The thing about doubt is that it's like a slow poison. It eats away at you until you can't think straight. And in my case, it led to a decision I never thought I'd make. The next Saturday, while Emma was at her usual yoga class, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. I'd heard about those apps people use to track phones, mostly from movies and crime dramas, and while it felt wrong, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being kept from me. After an hour of fumbling through tech jargon and awkward tutorials, I managed to install the app on her phone. I told myself it was temporary, just until I could figure out what was going on. But deep down, I knew this was the point of no return. Trust is a fragile thing, and once you start spying on your partner, it's clear that trust is already broken. That night, when Emma came home, the app pinged her location. She was exactly where she said she'd be. Sophie's house. I breathed a small sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The next time she left for yoga, the app told a different story. Instead of heading to the community center, Emma's phone was showing her at a downtown hotel. Not a restaurant, not a yoga studio. A hotel. My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest as I stared at the screen. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she was meeting a client for her counseling work. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But as the minutes turned into an hour, then 2, those maybes began to crumble. That night, I didn't say anything I couldn't. My mind was a whirlwind of scenarios, none of which ended well. Every time I looked at her, all I could think about was that little blinking dot on the map, sitting there in the heart of the city, telling a story I wasn't ready to hear. The breaking point came a week later. Emma had gone out again, claiming she needed some me time. After a long day at work, I stayed home with the kids, trying to distract myself with a movie, but as soon as I heard the garage door close, I pulled out my phone and opened the app. Sure enough, she wasn't at the yoga studio. This time, her location was pinging at a fancy rooftop bar downtown. I stared at the address, my hands trembling. Enough was enough. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it out myself. I arrived at the bar about 45 minutes later. It was the kind of place we used to visit on special occasions. Dimly lit, with soft jazz playing in the background and overpriced cocktails served in delicate glassware. I stepped inside, scanning the crowd for Emma. And that's when I saw her. She was sitting at a corner table, laughing at something a man across from her had said. He was tall, clean-cut, and dressed in a tailored suit. Everything about him screamed confidence, from the way he leaned in when he spoke to the casual way he rested his hand on the back of her chair. Emma's laugh. It wasn't the polite chuckle she gave me these days. It was genuine, carefree. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years. I stood there frozen, watching as my wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, flipped her hair and smiled in a way I hadn't seen in ages. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I didn't approach them. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I turned and walked out of the bar, my mind racing. On the drive home, I tried to piece it all together. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And more importantly, why? By the time I got home, I was no closer to an answer. The kids were asleep, and the house was eerily quiet. I sat down on the couch, staring at the wall, wondering what my next move should be. When Emma came home a few hours later, I was still sitting there. She looked surprised to see me awake. "Hey," she said, slipping off her shoes. "Why are you still up?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just looked at her, studying her face for any trace of guilt or regret. But if she felt any, she didn't show it. "Did you have fun tonight?" I finally asked, my voice calm. "Yeah," she said, a little too quickly. "Sophie and I had a great time." I nodded, letting the lie hang in the air between us. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand an explanation, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the storm brewing inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of Emma at that bar, laughing with that man. It was like a splinter in my mind, impossible to ignore. Finally, I decided to confide in someone I called my best friend, Jake, and told him everything. Jake had always been the rational one, the guy who could talk me down when I was spiraling. But even he was at a loss for words. "Man, I don't know what to tell you," he said, after I finished. "But you need to talk to her. Keeping this bottled up is only going to eat you alive." He was right. Of course I couldn't keep living like this. But the thought of confronting Emma filled me with a mix of dread and anger. What if she denied it? What if she admitted it? Either way, Our lives would never be the same. The confrontation happened that Friday night. I waited until the kids were asleep, then sat Emma down in the living room. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Okay, about what?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know about the bar I saw you with him." Her face went pale, and for a moment she looked like she might deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky sigh. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." And that's where I'll leave it for now. The story only gets more intense from here, with secrets unraveling and relationships being tested like never before. If you've been hooked so far, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel for part 2 of this rollercoaster story. The moment Emma confessed, the weight of her words hit me like a freight train. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. She didn't need to say his name for me to know who she was talking about. The image of her at the bar with that man was already burned into my brain. "It just happened?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Emma, things like this don't just happen. You don't accidentally find yourself at a bar, laughing with someone who isn't your husband." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she reached out for my hand, but I pulled away. "I'm so sorry, Daniel," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you." The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I couldn't look at her. My thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I had spent 15 years building a life with this woman, and now it all felt like a lie. The next few days were unbearable. We barely spoke, and when we did, the conversations were tense and guarded. Emma insisted that the relationship with the man, Alex, hadn't gone beyond a few dinners and drinks. "It was never physical," she said repeatedly, as if that would somehow lessen the betrayal. But for me, the emotional connection she'd formed with him was just as devastating. Meanwhile, I was struggling to hold it together for Max and Lily. They were too young to understand what was happening, and I didn't want to drag them into the mess. But the cracks were starting to show. Max noticed how quiet Emma and I had become at the dinner table, and Lily asked me why I looked so sad all the time. "I'm just tired, sweetheart," I told her, forcing a smile. But deep down, I knew that the truth would come out eventually. It was only a matter of time. The turning point came one evening when I was sitting alone in the living room, scrolling through photos on my phone. There was one of Emma and me from last summer, taken during a family trip to the lake. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, with the sun setting behind us. Looking at it now, it felt like a different lifetime. That's when I made the decision. I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. If there was any hope of saving our marriage, or even just finding closure, I needed answers. Real answers. The following weekend, I told Emma we needed to talk. I'd already arranged for Max and Lily to stay with my parents for the night, so we could have the house to ourselves. She looked nervous, but she agreed. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. "I need you to be honest with me," I said, my voice firm. "No more excuses, no more half-truths. I deserve to know everything." Emma took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. "It started a few months ago," she admitted. "Alex joined the staff at the school and we just clicked. At first it was innocent, just friendly conversations in the break room. But then we started texting, and it became something more." Her words felt like daggers, each one piercing deeper than the last. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why wasn't I enough?" "It's not about you," she said quickly. "Daniel, you've been an amazing husband and father, but somewhere along the way, I started to feel invisible, like I was just going through the motions of life, and Alex made me feel seen again." That night, I slept on the couch, my mind replaying her words over and over. Invisible scene. Those were the words she'd used to justify her betrayal. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me understood. Somewhere along the way, we had stopped truly seeing each other. The routines of daily life had taken over, and we had both been too caught up in our own worlds to notice the growing distance. But understanding didn't make the pain any easier to bear, and it didn't change the fact that she had chosen to seek comfort in someone else, instead of talking to me. In the weeks that followed, the tension between us reached a boiling point. Emma tried to convince me that she was committed to repairing our marriage, but I struggled to trust her. Every time her phone buzzed, I felt a surge of anxiety. Every time she left the house, I wondered if she was really going where she said she was. One night, after the kids were asleep, I confronted her about Alex. "Have you talked to him?" I demanded. She hesitated, and that split-second pause told me everything I needed to know. "Yes," she admitted, "but only to tell him that it's over, I swear. Daniel, I'm done with him." Her words sounded sincere, but the damage had already been done. Trust is a fragile thing, and once it's broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. Then came the breaking point, the moment that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and I was working late in my home office. Emma had taken the kids to soccer practice, and the house was quiet except for the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows. I decided to take a break and check my email. But when I opened my browser, I noticed that Emma's email account was still logged in from the last time she'd used my computer. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. I clicked on her inbox and started scrolling through her messages. Most of them were harmless. Emails from co-workers, school updates, and online shopping receipts. But then I saw it. An email from Alex, dated just 2 days ago. The subject line read, "I miss you." My hands shook as I clicked on the email. His message was short but painfully clear. "I know we agreed to end things, but I can't stop thinking about you. I miss our talks, our connection. I miss us." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I hoped, prayed, that Emma hadn't responded. But then I saw her reply, "I miss you too." That night, I confronted her once again. This time, there was no holding back. "I saw the email," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You said you were done with him, but you're still talking to him. You're still lying to me." Emma's face crumpled and she burst into tears. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I thought I could end it, but I'm struggling. It's not that I don't love you, Daniel. I do, but I feel so torn." Her words pushed me over the edge. "Torn?" I shouted. "You don't get to feel torn. You made a choice that destroyed our marriage, our family, everything we built together. And now you expect me to just stand by while you figure out your feelings?" The argument escalated, our voices echoing through the house. For the first time, years of pent-up resentment spilled out. On both sides, Emma accused me of being emotionally distant, of prioritizing work over our relationship. I accused her of giving up on us and taking the easy way out. By the time we were done, we were both exhausted, emotionally drained, and no closer to a resolution. And that's where the story reaches its most intense moment. The decisions we make next will shape the rest of our lives, and the lives of our children. If you've been riveted by this emotional roller coaster, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for the final part of this story. The house felt like a battleground. After the argument, Emma retreated upstairs, leaving me in the living room with nothing but my own thoughts and the distant sound of rain against the windows. My chest was tight, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. How had we gotten here? Could we even find a way back? And most importantly, did I even want to? The next day, Emma approached me with an air of determination. Her eyes were red and puffy, But her voice was steady. "I've decided to see a therapist," she said. "I know I've made mistakes, and I need to figure out why I did what I did, not just for us, but for myself." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Therapy felt like a step in the right direction, but it also felt like a band-aid on a wound that was too deep to heal. Still, I didn't want to discourage her. "That's a good idea," I said simply, but deep down, I knew that her journey of self-reflection wouldn't erase the damage that had already been done. Over the next few weeks, things settled into an uneasy rhythm. Emma kept her promise and started attending therapy sessions twice a week. She'd come home looking emotionally drained but determined to make amends. She'd cook dinner, help the kids with their homework, and even try to strike up conversations with me. But no matter how hard she tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that our marriage was teetering on the edge of a cliff. And then came the school fundraiser. It was a Friday evening, and the school was hosting a silent auction to raise money for new playground equipment. Emma insisted we go as a family. Arguing that it would be good for the kids, I agreed, though the thought of being in a room full of smiling parents and cheerful teachers felt almost unbearable. The event was held in the school gym, which had been transformed with twinkling fairy lights and tables covered in crisp white linens. Emma and I stood side by side, making small talk with other parents while Max and Lily ran off to join their friends. For a moment, I almost believed we could pretend to be a normal, happy family. But then I saw him, Alex. He was standing near the refreshment table, chatting with a group of teachers. His presence hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't seen him in person before, but there was no mistaking who he was. Tall, confident, and perfectly put together, he looked exactly like the kind of man who would catch Emma's eye. And judging by the way she stiffened when she noticed him, I knew she hadn't expected him to be there either. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a polite nod before turning his attention back to his group. I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening as I tried to keep my emotions in check. "Let's go," I said to Emma, my voice low and tense. "We can't just leave," she whispered back, her tone pleading. "The kids." "I don't care," I snapped, cutting her off. "We're leaving now." The car ride home was silent, the tension between us palpable. The kids sat in the back seat, oblivious to the storm brewing between their parents. As soon as we walked through the front door, I turned to Emma. "Did you know he'd be there?" I demanded. "No," she said quickly, her eyes wide with fear. "I swear, Daniel, I didn't." "Then why were you so nervous?" I shot back. "Why did you look like a deer caught in headlights the second you saw him?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she just stood there, her face a mixture of guilt and frustration. I didn't wait for an answer. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring as I tried to process everything. Seeing Alex had brought all my doubts and fears crashing to the surface. It was one thing to hear about him, but to see him in person, to see the man who had come between me and Emma, was almost too much to bear. By the time I returned home, it was well past midnight. The house was dark, and everyone was asleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. Each one felt like a reminder of what I was about to lose. The next morning, Emma and I finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding. "I think we need to take a break," I said, my voice heavy with resignation. "This isn't working, Emma. I don't know if it ever will." Her face crumpled, and she sank into the chair across from me. "Daniel, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can to fix this." "I know," I said softly, "but it's not enough. I can't keep living like this, constantly wondering if I'll ever be able to trust you again. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to the kids." Tears streamed down her face, and for a moment, I almost caved. But deep down, I knew this was the right decision. We needed space to figure out what we really wanted. what we really needed. Emma moved out a week later, renting a small apartment a few miles away. We told the kids it was temporary, that Mum and Dad just needed some time apart to sort things out. They took the news as well as could be expected, though I could see the confusion and sadness in their eyes. Life without Emma was strange at first. The house felt emptier, quieter, but it also felt lighter. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. And then came the email. It was late one evening, and I was going through my inbox when I saw it. A message from Alex. My heart sank as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. Daniel, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I feel like I owe you an apology. I never meant to cause any harm to your family, and I regret the pain I've caused Emma, and I made a mistake that shouldn't have happened. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I stared at the screen, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, resentment, and, unexpectedly, closure. For months, I had been consumed by the idea of Alex as this faceless villain, the man who had stolen my wife. But his words reminded me that this wasn't just about him. It was about Emma and the choices she had made. Choices that had torn our family apart. As I hit delete on the email, I felt a sense of finality. This chapter of my life was coming to an end, and while it wasn't the ending I had hoped for, it was the one I needed. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. And that, my friends, is where we'll leave it for now. If you're still invested in this story, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part of this emotional journey. With Emma gone, I thought things might start to settle. But the truth is, the hardest part of any break isn't the immediate aftermath. It's the moments when the silence creeps in. When you're left alone with your thoughts, the memories, and the weight of everything that's been lost. At first, I threw myself into my routine. Work became my refuge, the one place where things still made sense. I made breakfast for the kids, drove them to school, and attended their soccer games like nothing had changed. But even as I went through the motions, the cracks were there. Max started asking why Mom wasn't coming home for dinner anymore. Lily spent more and more time in her room, drawing pictures of all of us together, like she was trying to hold on to the family we used to be. Every day felt like a delicate balancing act, trying to keep the kids' lives as normal as possible, while quietly unraveling behind closed doors. The real tipping point came 2 weeks after Emma moved out. It was a Saturday evening, and the kids were staying at her apartment for the weekend. I was sitting in the living room, flipping aimlessly through TV channels, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophie. "Can we talk? It's important." Sophie and I had always been friendly, but our conversations were usually casual, light banter during school events, or the occasional shared story about the kids. This felt different. I called her back immediately. Her voice was tight, almost hesitant. "Daniel, I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I feel like you have a right to know." "What is it?" I asked, my heart already sinking. "It's about Alex," she said, her words coming out in a rush. "I ran into him at the grocery store today and he mentioned that he and Emma have been talking again." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. For weeks, Emma had been adamant that she was committed to fixing things, not just for us, but for herself. Hearing that she was still in contact with Alex felt like a betrayal all over again. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice tight. "Yes," Sophie said, her tone filled with regret. He didn't go into detail, but it sounded like more than just a casual conversation. I thanked her for telling me and hung up, my mind racing. I wanted to call Emma right then and there to demand an explanation, but instead, I sat there, staring at my phone, the familiar anger bubbling up inside me. This wasn't just about Alex anymore. This was about the lies, the half-truths, and the constant sense of walking on a tightrope that never seemed to end. The next day, I confronted Emma. I waited until she dropped the kids off at the house, catching her just as she was about to leave. "Are you still talking to him?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She froze, her hand on the doorknob. "What are you talking about?" "Alex," I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. "Sophie told me she saw him. He said you've been talking again." Emma's face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's not what you think," she said. "He reached out to apologize, and I responded, 'That's it.'" "That's it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Emma, you promised me it was over. You said you were focusing on fixing things, on therapy, on us. How am I supposed to believe anything you say when you keep going behind my back?" The argument escalated quickly. For the first time, all the anger, hurt, and frustration I'd been holding back came pouring out. Emma tried to defend herself, but her words felt hollow, like she was grasping at straws. By the time she left, we were both emotionally drained, and I was no closer to understanding why she couldn't seem to let go of Alex. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For weeks, I'd been holding on to the hope that Emma and I could find a way back to each other. But now, that hope felt more like a distant memory. The breaking point came. A few days later, I was at work when I received a call from Max's school. He'd been sent to the principal's office for getting into a fight during recess. When I arrived, I found him sitting in the corner of the office, his arms crossed and his face flushed with anger. "What happened?" I asked, crouching down in front of him. "He said Mom and Dad don't love each other anymore," Max muttered, his voice trembling. "He said our family's broken." My heart sank. Max had always been a sensitive kid, but seeing him like this, angry, hurt and lashing out, was almost too much to bear. "Max," I said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know things are hard right now, but your mom and I both love you and Lily more than anything. That will never change." He didn't respond, but the tears welling up in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. The cracks in our family were growing wider, and I had no idea how to fix them. That evening, I called Emma. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. "Not about us, but about the kids. They're struggling, and we need to figure out how to help them." To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a nearby coffee shop the next day, sitting across from each other in awkward silence before finally diving into the conversation. "We can't keep dragging them through this," I said. "They're picking up on everything. The tension, the arguments, all of it." Emma nodded, her eyes filled with guilt. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been thinking the same thing." We spent the next hour discussing ways to support Max and Lily, setting up a consistent schedule, finding a family therapist, and making a commitment to keep our conflicts away from the kids. For the first time in weeks, it felt like we were on the same page, even if it was just for their sake. But the peace was short-lived. Later that week, I received an unexpected package in the mail. It was a manila envelope with no return address, and inside was a series of photographs. My hands shook as I flipped through them, each one worse than the last. Emma and Alex sitting together at a cafe. Emma and Alex walking through a park. And finally, Emma and Alex standing on the steps of his apartment building, locked in an embrace. The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. After everything, the promises, the therapy, the conversations about rebuilding trust, she was still lying to me, still choosing him. That night, I called Emma and told her to come over. When she arrived, I handed her the envelope without saying a word. She flipped through the photos, her face going pale as she realized what they meant. "Daniel, "I can explain," she began. But I cut her off. "I'm done," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I've tried to forgive you, to give you the benefit of the doubt. But this is the final straw." The conversation that followed was raw, emotional, and devastating. Emma begged for another chance, but I stood my ground. For too long, I'd been holding on to the idea of who we used to be, hoping that we could somehow find our way back. But now I realized that the person standing in front of me wasn't the woman I'd married. And I wasn't the same man anymore either. And just like that, the story reached its peak. A moment of heartbreak, clarity, and finality. If you've been on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for the conclusion to this emotional roller coaster. The confrontation in the living room was nothing short of explosive. The photos of Emma and Alex lay scattered across the coffee table, each one a stark reminder of the betrayal I could no longer ignore. Emma sat across from me, her face pale, and her hands trembling as she tried to form a coherent explanation. "Daniel," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Explain how you lied to me again. How you promised it was over, only to turn around and meet him behind my back." Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, I needed closure." "Closure?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "Emma, closure doesn't look like this. Closure doesn't involve sneaking around and hiding things. It's over, Emma. I can't keep doing this." Her tears fell freely now, but I didn't waver. For too long, I'd let myself be pulled back into the cycle of hope and disappointment, of promises made and broken. And now, with the evidence staring me in the face, I knew there was no going back. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking. "I love our family. Please, Daniel, don't give up on us." The words cut deep, but they weren't enough. Love alone wasn't enough, not when trust had been shattered so completely. "I need you to leave," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Daniel, please. Leave." The door closed behind her with a soft click, and for the first time in weeks the house was silent. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the photos on the table, trying to make sense of everything. But no matter how hard I tried, the truth remained the same. The life we'd built together was gone, replaced by something I barely recognized. The days that followed were a blur. I filed for separation, a decision that felt both necessary and devastating. Telling Max and Lily was the hardest part. We sat them down together, explaining in the simplest terms that Mum and Dad needed to live apart for a while. Max looked angry, his fists clenched at his sides, while Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Is it because of us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, sweetheart," I said quickly, pulling her into a hug. "This isn't your fault. Your mum and I we need some time to figure things out." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. Time wouldn't fix this. Nothing would. Meanwhile, Emma moved into a new apartment across town. She called often, asking to talk, to explain, to try and salvage what was left of our relationship. But I kept my distance, focusing on the kids and my own healing. Every time I heard her voice, I felt the anger and sadness bubbling back to the surface, and I knew I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. The turning point came on a cold December evening. I was sitting in the stands at Max's soccer game, bundled up against the chill. The kids had adjusted surprisingly well to the new routine. Though I could see the cracks in their brave faces, Max played with an intensity I hadn't seen before. His movements sharp and deliberate, as if he were channeling all his emotions into the game. Emma showed up halfway through the match, her face lighting up as she spotted us in the stands. She waved, but I didn't wave back instead. I focused on the field, pretending not to notice as she made her way to sit beside me. "Hey," she said softly, pulling her coat tighter around her. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the game. The tension between us was palpable, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. "I just wanted to say thank you," she continued after a moment, "for letting me come tonight." "You're their mother," I said simply. "You don't need my permission." We sat in silence for the rest of the game, the cheers and shouts of the other parents filling the space between us. When the final whistle blew and Max's team celebrated their win, Emma turned to me, her expression serious. "Daniel, I know I've hurt you, and I know I've lost your trust, but I'm not giving up on us." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the faint hope that we could somehow rebuild what we'd lost. But the other part, the part that had been burned too many times, knew better. "You should talk to the kids," I said finally, standing up and brushing past her. "They're the ones who need you right now." The drive home was quiet, the kids chattering in the back seat about the game while I stared at the road ahead. Emma's words replayed in my mind, stirring up emotions I thought I'd buried. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. Too much had happened, and some wounds were too deep to heal. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the process of moving forward. I started therapy, both for myself and for the kids, hoping to make sense of everything and find a way to heal. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild, focusing on my work, spending quality time with Max and Lily, and reconnecting with old friends who had been there for me through it all. Emma, meanwhile, continued her own journey. She stayed in therapy, attended parenting workshops, and made a genuine effort to be there for the kids. She apologized to them, explaining in age-appropriate terms that she had made mistakes, but was committed to being a better mum. And while I could see the progress she was making, I couldn't help but wonder if it was enough. The climax came one snowy evening in January. Emma called, asking if we could meet for coffee. Reluctantly, I agreed, if only to finally get some closure. We met at a small cafe downtown, the warm glow of the lights contrasting sharply with the cold outside. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, her hands wrapped around her mug. "And I've realized something. I don't just want to fix things for the kids, I want to fix things for us." Her words were earnest, her eyes filled with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in months. But I wasn't sure if it was enough. "Emma," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I appreciate everything you've done, the therapy, the effort, all of it. But I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, what do we have?" Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then she nodded, her expression resolute. "I understand," she said quietly. "And if you're not ready, I'll respect that. But I'm not giving up on us, Daniel. Not yet." The conversation left me with more questions than answers, but it also gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe we couldn't go back to the way things were, but maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward, one step at a time. And that's where we'll leave it for now. The story has reached its most pivotal moment, and the next steps will determine everything. If you've been captivated by this journey, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the final chapter of this emotional roller coaster. The snow had stopped falling by the time I left the cafe. The streets were quiet, blanketed in a thin layer of white that reflected the warm glow of the streetlights. As I walked back to my car, Emma's words played over and over in my mind. "I'm not giving up on us." For months, I had been carrying the weight of betrayal, anger, and sadness. I'd replayed every conversation, every moment, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. But now, standing on the cusp of something new, something uncertain, I realized it wasn't about finding answers anymore. It was about moving forward, one way or another. The next few weeks were a time of reflection. Emma and I kept our distance, focusing on co-parenting and maintaining some semblance of stability for Max and Lily. We alternated weekends, attended school events together without drama, and made sure the kids felt supported through the changes. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I began to notice a change in Emma. She seemed lighter, freer, as if the burden of her mistakes had finally been lifted. She threw herself into therapy, took up journaling, and even started volunteering at a local shelter. It was clear she was working on herself, not for me, but for her. And that, more than anything, gave me hope. One evening, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she asked a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Do you think you and Mom will ever live together again?" Her big, hopeful eyes stared up at me, and I felt my chest tighten. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly, "but what I do know is that your mom and I both love you and Max more than anything. And no matter what happens, we'll always be a family." She nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer, and drifted off to sleep. But her question lingered with me long after I closed her bedroom door. Emma and I decided to meet again, this time with a clearer purpose. We sat down at the same cafe where we'd had so many difficult conversations, but this time, the air between us felt different. Lighter, more hopeful. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," I began, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly, "about wanting to fix things, and I think I owe it to myself to be honest with you." Emma's eyes searched mine, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I'm listening," she said softly. "I'm still hurt," I admitted, "and I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I used to, but I've also realized that holding on to all this anger isn't helping anyone, least of all me." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand," she said. "And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I just want the chance to show you that I can be better." We agreed to take things slow, focusing first on rebuilding a foundation of trust. There were no grand promises or sweeping declarations of love. Just two people trying to figure out if there was anything left to salvage. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost. Hope. Max and Lily noticed the change almost immediately. They saw us laughing together at soccer games, sitting side by side at school plays, and even sharing the occasional family dinner. They didn't ask questions, but their smiles told me everything I needed to know. For the first time in a long time, they felt like their family was whole again, even if just for a moment. As the months passed, Emma and I continued to navigate our new normal. Some days were easier than others. There were moments of doubt, times when the pain resurfaced and the memories threatened to pull us back into old patterns. But there were also moments of connection, quiet conversations over coffee, shared laughter during family game nights, and the realization that, despite everything, we still cared deeply for each other. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Emma turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "I know I've said this before," she began, her voice steady, "but I need to say it again. I'm sorry, Daniel. For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, the pain I caused. I know I can't undo the past. But I want you to know that I'm committed to being better. Not just for you, but for myself." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. She wasn't just apologizing. She was taking responsibility, something I hadn't seen in her before. We decided to give couples therapy a try, not with the goal of fixing everything overnight, but to explore whether rebuilding our relationship was even possible. The sessions were difficult, filled with raw emotions and painful truths. But they were also cathartic, allowing us to address the issues that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Through therapy, I began to see Emma in a new light, not as the woman who had hurt me, but as a flawed, vulnerable person who was trying to make amends. And in turn, I began to confront my own shortcomings, the ways I had withdrawn emotionally, the times I had prioritized work over our relationship, and the moments when I had failed to truly see her. By the time spring arrived, Emma and I had reached a crossroads. We had spent months rebuilding trust, communicating openly, and reconnecting as co-parents. But the question still lingered. Was there a future for us as a couple? One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Emma turned to me and said, "I don't want to pressure you, Daniel. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But I need to know, do you think we have a chance?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I think we do," I said finally. "But it's going to take time, and it's going to take work." She smiled, a small but genuine smile that reminded me of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. "I'm ready," she said simply. And so, we began the slow process of rebuilding, not as the people we used to be, but as the people we had become. It wasn't easy, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving forward together. As the story comes to a close, I want to leave you with this. Life is messy. Relationships are messy. But sometimes, through the mess, we find a way to grow, to heal, and to move forward, whether together or apart. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you've enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories like this one. Until next time, take care and remember, every ending is just the beginning of something new.